The hypertrophy phase of training. The hypertrophy phase is a powerful phase of training, also known as the muscle growing phase. But first, let's pronounce it correctly together. Hypertrophy is hypertrophy, like a buff kitty cat. Hypertrophy, not hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is the overgrowth, hypertrophy, overgrowth of muscles and the cells that are in the muscles. We actually increase the cross-sectional area of the muscle cells, and so they get bigger. And that's important because muscle growth also leads to things like improved strength capacity, and they also will help you with carbohydrate tolerance, meaning that the carbs that you do eat, your body knows what to do with them because you have big, strong muscles who know what to do with carbohydrates. It improves things like insulin sensitivity and hormone optimization. So hypertrophy, very, very powerful phase of training. There is a number of reasons why we want to make sure to keep your muscle tissue in a healthy place, but here is not the time to talk about that necessarily. So the hypertrophy phase can last anywhere between 4 weeks if you're a beginner in the hypertrophy phase, all the way up to 12 weeks. And sometimes within the hypertrophy phase, you might have little periods of rest called deloads. That's when you take a little dial back from the intensity, let your joints recover, let your mind recover, let your hormonal systems recover so that you can get right back to your training. But the hypertrophy phase can be anywhere between 4 and 12 weeks, and we're growing muscle that whole time. Now, the goals in this phase, we're creating an adaptive stress in our type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers. That means that when we're exercising, in the endurance phase, that's the previous phase to hypertrophy, we're targeting type 1 muscle fibers. Those are the slow twitch muscle fibers that burn fat primarily as a fuel source. They're long and lean. They can go for a long time. That's why you have lots of repetitions there. Now we're starting to bleed into where type 1 muscle fibers and type 2 muscle fibers work together. That's the hypertrophy phase. And so type 2 muscle fibers are those fast twitch muscle fibers. They burn mostly carbohydrates as a fuel source, and they're quick, they're fast, they're strong, they're agile and powerful, right? So lots of things going on with those muscle fibers. We're working both of those muscle fiber types together, and that's what creates that muscle growth. Next, we're enhancing our hormonal response to exercise. So hypertrophy generally activates large muscle groups, which can in turn signal the body to optimize your hormonal response to exercise. So things like cortisol, your stress hormone, testosterone for the men, a primary sex hormone, your estrogen and progesterone in women. There's a number of hormonal responses that come from hypertrophy work, and it's important and powerful for the body to go through hypertrophy and to respond positively in a hormonal way. And last but not least, the last goal in this particular phase is to grow muscle. In the hypertrophy phase of training, we are teaching the body that your muscle is very important, that you're going to use it for stuff, that we need to increase the number of resources that our body puts toward our muscle tissue, and that we need to keep our muscle tissue active because who knows when we're going to use it to lift heavy things, and that's good. You need to create that stressor on the body. So these workouts are generally heavier and they require more time than the foundations and endurance phase. So if you were building your exercise house, so to speak, and you've done the foundations phase, you've put up the walls, you've done the endurance phase, hypertrophy is kind of the roof on the house, so to speak. And the way this kind of progresses is that you go from body weight and lighter weight to moderate and heavy weights with less repetitions. And so those are the acute variables of the hypertrophy phase. 1, we are doing heavier weight with less repetition. You're looking at about 8 to 12 repetitions per set for your exercise. And the weight that you're doing for that is a non-injurious 10 rep max, meaning you want the heaviest weight that you can handle for about 10 reps. Sometimes you'll get a little less than that. Sometimes you'll get a little more than that. But what you don't want to do in this phase of training is cheat your muscles. If you can bench press with dumbbells, if you can bench press with dumbbells 60 pounds for 10 repetitions, then you should use 60 pounds for 10 repetitions. But if you grab 30s And you could do 20 reps with these, but you're only going to do 10 because that's what the workout says. Then you're not really getting the adaptive stress for the muscle that you need in order to create growth. Now, there might be injury reasons or joint reasons that you want to go a little lighter in certain sets of your hypertrophy, and that's okay. But by and large, the general rule in hypertrophy is called progressive overload. That means that you want to give the muscle the heaviest, most difficult thing that it can handle for that 8 to 12 repetition range. Create good form, get a spotter if you need it, and really knock out a great set. That said, the hypertrophy phase also has more sets. We're looking at between 3 and up to 6 sets for particular exercises in hypertrophy. So in earlier phases of training, we were doing less sets, 1 to 3. As we come into the hypertrophy phase, we're really increasing that volume. That's what sets are, the volume of work that we're doing. And these are hard working sets. If you do a set that's kind of a warm-up set, let's say, again, we come back to the chest press here, and you do a light set in order to get the movement pattern down and kind of get your mind right and wake up the muscle and that sort of thing. Great, but that's not a working set. We're looking at 3 to 6 working sets in this phase of training. Then we also have more rest in this phase of training. Because each set is more intense, you need to give the muscles some time to rest. Remember, we're taxing the type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers, and those fibers are surrounded by a fluid that has the resources the muscle needs in order to continue to operate. But it takes some time to restore the resources back to that fluid after a hard set. So in the hypertrophy phase, if you're doing a heavy weight and you knock out 10 repetitions, and they're the hardest reps you can get out, man, and you drop them and you're done with your set, then you need to give your muscles adequate time to rest, between 60 seconds and 120 seconds, depending on how quickly you recover and how hard the set was. That said, observe these rest periods carefully. This is where people will want to come talk to you in the gym or that sort of thing and interrupt your workout, and what really, or maybe you scroll social media. Don't do that. That's not going to help you grow muscle. That's not a supplement that works, all right? But the rest periods really matter. And so if you're supposed to be taking a 90-second rest period in between your 5 sets, but you're really taking 4-minute rest periods between your 5 sets, then you're going to limit your growth, because the muscle needs to recover, but it doesn't need to rest so long that you reduce the adaptive stress. So more rest, but not infinite rest. Also in this phase, we're trying to increase our 10 rep max. This is incremental improvement. Earlier I called it progressive overload. That means every time you work out, you're either trying to get a couple more reps or you're trying to increase the weight. Okay, so week over week, if I did a chest press with 50 pounds, next week I want to try 55. Or if I did 12 reps with 50 pounds, I want to see if I can't eke out a few extra reps and maybe next week increase the weight. The goal is to continually be adding to the stress of the muscle in this phase of training. Last but not least, in the acute variables, you can also use supersets in giant sets for hypertrophy, meaning that it actually takes a long time to do these workouts if you're observing rest periods. And so it's nice sometimes to pair 2 exercises together that hit different muscle groups. So for instance, let's say I'm doing a lat pull down, which hits my lats and my biceps, right? And then I'm going to superset that with something that'll hit my chest or my triceps. Since my chest and triceps didn't do anything or didn't do much in the lat pull down, I can do something that would tax them. So something like a weighted push-up is a really good superset with a heavy lat pull down, because both of those exercises are hitting different sets of muscle groups and making great use of the time that you have in the gym. So we've got cardio and nutrition, and then you can go get your hypertrophy done. In the hypertrophy phase, cardiovascular exercise is not the focal point of hypertrophy. Long duration cardiovascular exercise tends to break down muscle tissue rather than build it up. In the hypertrophy phase, we're trying to grow muscle tissue, so we don't want to be what's called catabolic. We don't want to be putting a catabolic stress on the body. So In the hypertrophy phase of training, we're really focusing on moderate intensity cardiovascular exercise and short bouts of high intensity cardiovascular exercise with minimal base training. What that means is when you are doing cardio during hypertrophy, they're relatively short bouts, less than 30 minutes, and we're looking at maintaining intensity and getting rest rather than trying to go as fast as possible for as long as possible, or getting 90-minute or 120-minute bouts of base training. So cardiovascular exercise and hypertrophy, you need less than most other phases of training. Last but not least is the nutritional considerations. Now, everybody's their own snowflake with regard to nutrition, but there are some general principles in hypertrophy. In hypertrophy, we need a little more carbohydrates than we need in the other phases of training. This is where pre-workout carbohydrates and post-workout carbohydrates can be really beneficial for giving your muscles the fuel they need in order to work hard in your workouts. And so if you've been eating relatively low carbohydrate during the endurance phase, for instance, then we might want to up the ante in the hypertrophy phase in order to promote muscle growth. Somewhere between 30 and 60 grams of carbs, maybe even more on your weight training days, more than usual. Then we've also got supplements. Creatine monohydrate, it's a good time to consider whether or not creatine monohydrate might be a good supplement for you, because there have been an immense amount of studies done on creatine monohydrate in muscle growth without any negative side effects. And so it's worth talking through that with your coach and getting educated on whether or not you have any contraindications to creatine supplementation. Also, caffeine. Caffeine is an ergogenic aid that improves your focus and your attention. There are 5 million pre-workouts out there with a whole bunch of caffeine, or you can grab some green tea or a cup of coffee, and those will work just as great without all the stuff added to them. There's a few other things worth mentioning there, but here's not the time for that either. The last two considerations for hypertrophy is you need to feed the beast. Some people try to create some sort of caloric deficit during hypertrophy, and that's not very helpful to you. If you're trying to grow muscle, you're working yourself hard in the gym, and you're asking the muscles to adapt and recover, you cannot starve them. It does not work very well. You're not going to grow great muscle tissue while trying to maintain some sort of caloric deficit. There are phases of training that lend themselves to reducing body fat and reducing body weight, and hypertrophy is really not one of them. Think of it as an investment in the future of improving your body composition. If you grow some muscle now, it's going to be a lot easier to create some sort of deficit in the future and to change your body composition. And then last but not least, the most important aspect of hypertrophy is sleep. If you are not recovering well from your workouts, you will get injured and you will not grow muscle, and that's not good. So you need to make sure that you're setting aside the time you need in order to recover fully from your workouts. Get your sleep routine on point. Things like making sure that the room is cold and dark and you have a normal bedtime and a normal wake time. If you need a nap, take it. You are a growing beast, man. You need rest. So let your body adapt in rest, because all of the work that you did in the gym, the magic happens after the workout in recovery. So sleep is a very, very powerful part of making sure the hypertrophy phase is awesome for you. The hypertrophy phase is my favorite phase of training. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you work extra hard. Don't let yourself stagnate. Work toward that progressive overload. And if you need a hand, you know where to find me.